Yet another interesting session lined up for you, a paradigm of sustainable construction and innovation, a Metropol Parasol. Let's put our hands together as I once again have the pleasure of inviting on stage Mr. J. Mayer, founder and partner, J. Mayer H. & Partners. Thank you for joining us yet again.
Thank you very much. I indicated earlier a little bit about timber construction as maybe a new form to innovate when we talk about how to build. And this is something that I would like to share with you today. I'm showing one project, but I'm showing it more in an overall, let's say, in-depth consideration on how it developed and what it did and how it arrived in the city. And this is what you see as Metropol Parasol in Sevilla in Spain. It's a very hot part of Europe. It's not very humid, but it has strong summers and kind of mild winters, but the summer is really what's counting here. The project is in the very center of the old medieval town center of Seville, which is a very tight urban fabric, similar to Venice without the water. So what you have here is a city that is growing for thousands of years, mostly in the very center of the city, which you see here. And now this doesn't really work on a projection like this, but you can see the oval, which is the center of the city, and then across from the river you have the Expo site from 1992. But we are focusing on the very center, which is kind of the iconic part of Sevilla. The red spot is the Plaza de la Encarnación. This is where the project is located. But you have on the lower side all the important institutions like the Alcazar and the town hall and let's say the shopping streets. The northern part in 2004 when the competition happened was quite underdeveloped, a little shady, not really dangerous, but not a place where people would go. That changed completely in the last 5 years. The long green strip that you see on the top, that's now the hub for nightlife. This is where all the restaurants are, where the bars are happening. This is where the city is now booming. But when you look at it from the air, you see how Metropol Parasol, this kind of big mushroom structure sitting in the very center of the city, is really dominating and introducing a contemporary form of architecture. And I will show you how that actually is related to the kind of the history and other forms and conditions that we found in Sevilla. So it's quite typical and specifically designed for that city, although it kind of looks from today. Sevilla is important for European culture because this is where Islam somehow entered medieval Europe and brought a lot of innovation, mathematics, also hygiene culture. A lot of things that we take for granted today really came as a modernization momentum through the Islamic culture. And this is where both cultures mixed, and somehow you can say that contemporary or modern Europe was happening for the first time in this part of the world. When you look at it on the skyline, you see the very dense city fabric here and how this kind of waffle structure is just hovering above that UNESCO heritage downtown of Sevilla. In the back you see the bridge by Calatrava, this wide-angled stick. This is from 1992, but nothing really happened since 1992. So we're talking about 23 years, let's say 20 years of hardly any development. Now, this is Metropol Parasol, and what you see here is a huge shadow structure that allows you to actually hang out outside in hot summer months. It's basically an architecture that brings shadow, and shadow was the first material that we thought is important when we are introducing contemporary architecture to the city center. It was an international competition that we won in 2004, and it took quite some time, like 7 years, to design and construct. But in 2011, it was inaugurated, and since then really activates the very center of the city. You see again here how it sits in the very heart. All the important roads actually are all coming together in this very center of the city. It was never really a plaza. It was always an institution, a cloister, a monastery, then the market, and now it's this market plus everything else that you see is happening now in the very center. What you see here is the condition when the competition was launched. Now, the southern part, you see these white long lines. These are buses, and this was the end point for a bus line going into the center of the city. This was the only public transportation that you would have. And then the northern part is where the market was still standing until the 70s. Then it was taken down, and it was a parking lot for many years until finally the city decided to build a parking garage, build 40-meter deep walls into the ground, take out the earth, and found Roman mosaics and all these, leftovers from the Roman times. This is when everything stopped, and the city decided, let's take this as a window into the history of our city. Like, where else do we have such a large area in the very town center that we can actually open up and expose and see and research how the city was founded and how people were living? And use that as a starting point to rethink about what is public space in the 21st century. I'm showing you again here the market. This is actually after the monasteries were down, after they took down small streets, houses, and all of a sudden small houses became plaza facades because they had to just open up more space to create a larger area for the market. Now, as I said before, in the 70s, the city grew so fast after the Second World War that they had to move the market outside of the very city center to, feeds the whole city, and therefore leaving a new potential in the very center of the city. However, that potential wasn't really used for more than 30 years. This is the market as you see it. I think today we would try to save it. In the 70s, it was quite run down and almost ready to collapse. So parking lot for about 30 years. Also, the ideas changed about traffic and cars in the city. So in the 80s and 90s, a lot of European cities rethought the idea of public transportation, introducing trams and trying to get rid of the cars, also bringing new bike systems, rent bikes and also bike lanes into city centers to make a more enjoyable pedestrian life. And also some of these streets are much more active and busy, and the shops are doing better because people can just walk to the streets, to the shops. They don't, they can bike to the shops, they have public transportation, and they have a better street life. Now, this is the parking spot for 30 years, but when we entered the competition, the first idea I had was, let's bring shadow, and we have to work on a really large roof. So the roof was the beginning of the whole project. We studied all kinds of geometries, octagonal ones, curved ones, triangular ones. But this one, this kind of cloud floating over the space, always was the one that kind of won the competition with other geometries. And there were also certain references that were important to us. One is, for example, this neighboring plaza with these huge trees, these Ficus Beniamini trees, that are somehow grown similar to what we are proposing to build. Or the beautiful undulative stone roof of the cathedral, which is like a flying carpet built, again a reference that we used. And it's in a similar height as the roof, and you see that the cathedral structure that you see from inside is the space-defining element. Same in our project, it's the skeleton, let's say the ribs and bones of the project that are the architecture of itself. Now you have the layering of these programs, the basement, which is the archaeology site that is given. Then on the ground floor, we introduce back some food market, but more for local use, and some restaurants to activate the street. Then the roof for these programs are an elevated plaza where you can also have different kinds of public activities. And then you have the parasol with a skywalk and a view above the city. Here's the view from the archaeology in the basement. And this is a section, and it's about 150 meters long, 35 meters high, and 75 meters wide. And when you look at the section at the bottom, you see that everything that's dark and gray is concrete or steel, but everything that's beige actually is a timber construction. And it's maybe the largest timber construction in the world, and maybe also the largest bonding technology, glued technology in the world as well, which happens from the moment where you have the horizontal cantilevering out, because there we had to develop completely new details. I'll show you that in a moment. But when we talk about sustainable construction, I mentioned earlier that we have to consider 5 different conditions to make it real sustainable. And they only work or let's say sustainability only applies if each of these conditions have some kind of importance in the project. So in this case, we start with quantum exchange and transferability, which means technological input and innovation that you are developing also has certain prototypal effects on other projects. So you can take that discovery and this development into something else. Then, of course, we have ethical standards and social liability and equality. So what are the effects on a grown culture and community around a project? And also, how does it enforce and kind of enable positive developments for an exchange and a space for communication, and also a street life and a public space life? Because only when people feel like they are connected, they are also, let's say, part of a certain bonding community, that's when also stress levels go down and they feel kind of settled in a place. Then, of course, the way how you choose a certain project, in this case a competition, how you communicate it, how are people involved in decision-making processes, and how do you make transparent decision-making arguments is an important part of acceptance, and also then, therefore, making projects alive and supported by the people. Also, the project, as I mentioned earlier, sits in the very center of the city, which had kind of a divide between a well-functioning southern part and a not so well-functioning northern part. And the project really wanted to bridge these conditions and create a certain equality within the city center in Sevilla. Then, of course, we have ecological issues and energy savings. This is usually what we understand as sustainable. In this case, it was about the shadow that's created a certain, let's say, environment that helps us to hang out outside and enjoy the outdoors, using that energy and the solar power also to generate energy for the building, using water as kind of atmospheric and cooling down effects, etc., etc. You saw explicit lectures this morning and this afternoon about these conditions. Of course, a lot of structures and studies and analysis that goes into this. We worked with Arab engineers in Berlin and Madrid. And then, of course, in choosing the materiality of the project, here we have the economic performance and comparability, which is a big issue, where, for example, cost development of steel was not an option versus timber, which had a more stable price condition in 2004-05. China was building up or buying up all the steel, so that was uncalculable basically to work on it. But also questions of how expansion and contraction works, how noise pollution happens on site, how much can you prefabricate and transport on the site, duration of construction, etc. All of these are important energy and cost effects which had to be considered, and therefore also economic effects. And only when certain things become economic, also with computers, we can work on much more complex geometric shapes that now are available to us because digital technology helps us to really go into new directions in terms of form making and also construction. And important enough also, if you create architecture, in this case a public project, which has a very important political and cultural component, how can you create a certain market and international attention with souvenirs, with kind of attracting also other business to the city to show that your innovation capacity really spans across the whole, let's say, culture of Sevilla. In this case, it was important to also show that by messaging this project beyond the borders of the city. And then we also have here the contextual response and aesthetic impact. This is what I mentioned as a countercultural response. That is important that you really anchor also contemporary architecture in a certain historic relevance. I'm jumping now to the way how this project was constructed. We worked with timber from Finland, which is laminated and cut and laminated and compressed in Munich in Germany. It's called Kerto, which is a very fine, like compressed new form of creating timber plates that then can be cut in different shapes and put together. Let's say layering and the compression happened in Munich. Also the details were put into the timber in Munich, and they were shipped to Seville, and the coating with polyurethane, which makes a timber weatherproof and also sustainable in the long term, also in climates like this, and also in hot climates, is an important factor. What you see here is this detail that actually is the bonding part of the project. These forces from one timber blade into the other were very strong, and you had to bring them deep into the timber in order to have the timber allow to transfer the load from one to the other. Otherwise, the timber would just splitter and decompose. So these steel rods that you see here are glued into the timber, and this is where the forces are transferred from one piece to the other. Here you have the steel rod in the center, then the timber around it, then the laminated timber, and then the polyurethane coating, which is 3 millimeters and protects the whole timber construction. Some images from the construction site. Here is the polyurethane coating outside of Sevilla. And then it's brought onto the construction site. You see the logistics of the steel joints here. Arab wanted to have 40,000 different steel joints. The construction company, reduced it to 4,000. So of course, there's also a balance between how much can you afford to build, how much, are you kind of assuming might be over-dimensioned, but on the other hand, saves costs in terms of development and also in time, et cetera, et cetera. We have 2 steel and concrete cores. This is where the elevators are and the fire stairs. And then we have a platform with a restaurant on top. But everything else that you see here is this laminated timber put together and joined together on site. Here are some images how it arrived in the city fabric that is really kind of giving the framework around a project like this in a different way. A view from the archaeology looking upstairs. Shadow, this is the material that is the most important on the site. This is around noontime. You have the grid projected on the ground. A little later, it might look like this. Back at noon, you have the grid. And then maybe 2 hours later, you have this beautiful swoop. So it's an animation where the natural conditions that are for free somehow are used to transform and animate the public space, even when the project gets projected against neighboring buildings. This is how it looks from the sky. This is a Bing map, a view from the ground again, connection to the existing buildings, the relationship to the surrounding. All of that, I think, works well in this kind of dialogue between old and new. This is the public plaza, elevated. Some details and the view onto the city. You can go up, you have a view overlooking the city with a skywalk. Within the first year, they already had 1.5 million visitors on top of it. So it's really part of the everyday routine of the people living in Seville who like to stroll in the evening, meet their friends sitting outside, but also a very important attraction for tourists. Some views at night. And now I'm showing you how it really arrived in the city. Here you have a poster from the Semana Santa, which is the Catholic celebration week before Easter. The whole city shuts down. They have these processions. They carry their holy, figures, Christ and Maria and Jesus, through the city. And of course, you can imagine that the conservative Catholic people did not like our project. But once it was finished, they understood that actually it was also helping their processions and their festivities, and it was already on the cover of their program. After years of demonstrating against our project, they finally embraced and made it part of their celebration of, the religion and the rituals of the city. This is the Christmas market, but here again you have the processions, these floats, which are carried through the whole city for a whole week, very special music. You see it here again, and you can imagine that it actually makes even more drama out of the drama that the Catholic Church already is bringing to the city. But then we have flamenco festivals that are happening there. Of course, there's a website, there's social media that helps to activate and program the space. It also works very well for very kitschy Latino pop here. I found already 4 or 5 music videos where they were using Metropol Parasol as the background. It also works for hip hop, supposedly. It works for more kitschy Latino pop. This is on the top of the parasol. Miss Spain took her photos there competing for Miss Universe. It did not help. She didn't get it. This is for public viewing. So the plaza becomes busy. It's the very heart where the city comes together and celebrates, being a city, being, with other people. This is again from the public viewing. There was a movie shot, an action movie with a shooting, and it also works for advertising. So Mercedes-Benz got inspired by it. So it's not shot there, but you can see there's a certain, let's say, reference to it. But BMW was there, and also Jeep, and also Volkswagen. So they all kind of felt it had some relevance for their cars. Then also it made it on the guidebooks for here Lonely Planet, for Seville, or the in-flight magazine of Iberia used it. Then Red Bull had a whole, I don't know how you call it, bike challenge all over Spain. This was the place in Seville to be part of it. It worked for Gay Pride, it works for the Cartoon Festival, it works for fashion. Again, later the hat, that was subculture, now became fashion culture. It works for cash machines, and it also already affects the naming of supermarkets and shops around it. Of course, souvenirs and tourist products. A smaller market, but still it shows how it starts to really vibrant and vibrantly radiate outside of the city and has a certain attraction and identification and shows that innovation part that the city was hoping it would create. Calendars next to Maria's and bullfights, even nice cute dogs next to ours. And of course, in street paintings and street photography, again, street painting. Cartoon festivals again. This is an Indian sports television show. I was actually giving these images this spring. Somebody saw it. It's supposedly 2 years ago. So it even made it all the way over to India. And it works also for Greek discotheques. Here are pictures that somebody sent me recently from a discotheque in Thessaloniki. It works also on the starting pages of certain social media. This is Bing China, for example, this year in summer, or Instagram, or other platforms. And other architects also seem to kind of catch up and make already transformations of this idea into other projects. And it has a life already beyond just this one location in Sevilla. It also is a place where the people of Seville are discussing about the future of their city. So this is when the new king was inaugurated. People raised their voice. But in 2011, this was the year when the project was finished, the whole country fell into a big recession. This is when every city, larger city in Spain, discussed about the future of the culture, future of their new generations, younger generations. In Sevilla, again, that happened on Plaza de la Encarnación, Metropol Parasol. This is where the culture and all generations discussed about how to move forward. Night and day, there were sit-ins in the evenings, large discussions, concerts, talks. There were moments of energy. Each foot of the parasol became part of that kind of demonstration week. One was the kitchen, one was the Wi-Fi zone, another one was signing up for the workshops, and you were even allowed to sleep during these moments, and the city kind of protected with the roof the people who really cared about the future of their country. So this is how I would like to finish the conversation and the presentation, how timber can create architecture that is beyond what we thought so far timber can do. But also, on the other hand, it brought a scale into a city which really celebrates our public life, and this is what mostly cares, how to make our cities sustainable. Thank you so much. Sorry?
Thank you so very much for sharing your opinion there. And I'd like to invite Mr. Rajadayani from St. Gobain to please join us on stage and present him with a memento of our appreciation. Let's put our hands together as Sir steps on stage. Thank you so very much once again. Thank you.